Again, my name is Gwen Sorley. Today, we'll be talking about assessing executive function and attentional control and why assessments are important. Now, assessments are tools that provide insight and direction. You may be here today because you are interested in actually doing an assessment, or perhaps you're wondering, well, is an assessment really important? I already know the areas in which I struggle, or I know where my concerns lie. Maybe you're an adult here today and you are really tired of working so hard every day, and at the end of the day, feeling like you got nothing accomplished. Or maybe you're a parent of a child who's incredibly bright and yet struggles at school because he has a hard time following through with his assignments. Or perhaps you're a professional and you are interested in offering your clients more assistance in the areas of attention and executive function. Why don't you go ahead and, if you would, use that chat box that I mentioned earlier and go ahead and type in what are some of the areas of concern you do have? And maybe these areas have been determined from an assessment, or perhaps they are just areas that you've observed from the day to day. So go ahead and let me know in the chat box what areas concern you. If you're looking at doing an assessment or you've done an assessment in the past, what are those areas you're concerned with? Emily says that she has a 9-year-old child who struggles with emotion regulation. Okay, excellent. Keep your comments coming. Brenda says procrastinating with big projects. Excellent. And Brenda, we just did a webinar on procrastination. We can send that to you if you're interested in the replay. And let's see. Also, Andre says that he has a hard time focusing and staying on task. So there are a lot of areas that we may have concerns with. Maria says focus, time management, memory, and social issues. Also participating and perfectionism. Angie says ODD. So there are a lot of areas of concern that you are all mentioning right now. Haley says executive function, primarily organization, assessed from life experience. Exactly. That's what we were talking about. Do I need an official assessment to tell me that I'm disorganized or I procrastinate? Let's see. Now, a lot are coming in here. Susanna says, I'm interested in the procrastination webinar too. Okay. 13-year-old needs organization, focus, and no filter, says whatever he thinks. So a little impulse control, right? Samantha says strategies to help a 13-year-old child with ADHD and mom who is probably ADD. Rosanna says, my students have problems with impulse regulation, organization, and procrastination. All right. Thank you for that feedback. That's really important to know. And you're also going into some of the other areas, and some of you are requesting more information on that webinar, which I will definitely make certain we get out to you. So when we talk about ADHD or weak executive function, it's a journey, isn't it? And we're on this journey, and it's important that we have some guidance so we know which path we take, right? Because when we talk about let's say procrastination, because a lot of you, Brenda and a couple others, Lori, you're all interested in procrastination. So if we want to improve procrastination, what path do we take? What path do we take to get to that final destination? And maybe that's the better question, right? Not so much what are the areas of concern, but if we take a particular path along this journey, what do we want our end goal to be? Well, we want our end goal to be that we're able to start tasks right away and stay on those tasks until completion. So in order to get to that final destination, do we continue on this same path we're going on now and hope for the best? Or do we take the path to the left, which may actually include some tips and strategies that we can incorporate on the day to day? Or do we take the path to the right, which perhaps gives us some tips and strategies, but also pinpoints different skills that we need to improve and has a specific plan in place to develop cognitive skills that are required for strong executive function? An assessment allows us to determine the correct path to take. These are a few things that an assessment can do for us. It can define the problem areas, right? And many of you have talked about the problem areas already. Lori says emotion regulation. Haley says her journey is a roller coaster. Exactly. And Haley, that's what we're hoping to get from these assessments, is to get off the roller coaster, right? And have a straight line, a path towards our destination. And so it can define those problem areas we've been discussing, can determine your strengths and weaknesses, not just your weaknesses, right? We also want to know, what are your strengths? What can we actually enhance through training? We want to make certain that we're improving those areas of weakness, but we also want to make certain that we're making certain we enhance those strengths. It also indicates the severity of those weaknesses, which I think is a really important note here, because a lot of times I'll speak to parents who will call in and they'll say, well, I think my child has ADHD or an attention difficulty because, he really has a hard time starting his homework when he comes home from school, right? He procrastinates. Homework that should take 15 minutes is taking 2 or 3 hours. He seems to be very impulsive. So he'll start doing other things while we're trying to do that homework, or he's easily distracted. But I don't know if it's really an issue. Is it really a concern, or is it just him being 7 years old? So an assessment, especially when they're a norm referenced test of attention or a norm referenced test of executive function, when we can look at the norm, we can look at the severity. And is it really something that we should be concerned about? Or is it just 7 being 7, right? That's something that assessments really do for us. It allows us, once we have all of this information, it allows us to develop a clear plan, right? So Haley can get off that roller coaster and have a clear plan to her destination, so that we can look at your strengths, we can look at the weaknesses, and we can customize a plan to make certain that you are successful in that journey. It's not a generalized plan at that point. We're not just saying, well, you're ADHD, so here's the plan. We're looking at you as an individual and making a plan based around those strengths and weaknesses. It also provides a baseline to document progress. When we talk about a plan of action, usually we have a timeline that's involved. We have specific goals along the way, benchmarks, if you will. We have that end goal in mind, and we have the strategies that we're going to use in order to reach that goal. So, for example, if you have an IEP with your child at school, perhaps you have your goals laid out for the year, and then you have your benchmarks, and you also have the strategies that are going to be used in order to reach those goals. And then you have a way to assess if those goals have been met, because it's not enough to say at the end of the school year, so do you think the goals have been met? Right? Well, it seems so. He seems to be doing better. We don't want to be vague. We want a real clear understanding as to whether or not our goals have been met. Also, it's nice to do a mid-assessment, right? To make certain that we're on track. What's working well? What's not working? What can we incorporate now? Have we already reached some of our goals? And we do that with in-play attention as well. We usually are going to work for approximately 40 hours of training, or Usually that's about a 10-month period. We have specific goals laid out, and we have specific modules to reach each of those goals. And so when we do an assessment up front, that gives us a baseline where we're starting, and it helps us make the plan. And then around the 20-hour mark, we do another assessment, and we can see, what's working, what's going well, what can we incorporate now, what can we actually stop using because we've reached our goal already. And then at the 40-hour mark, when we're looking at graduation, it's great to do another assessment, because then we can determine, is it actually time to graduate this program? Have we reached our final destination? Have we met all of our goals? So it is truly a great way to have that baseline so we can document progress along the way. When we talk about attention deficit disorder, ADHD, or weak executive function, attention is just one piece of the puzzle, right? It's usually the primary piece that comes up initially, but it's just one piece of the puzzle. It's important we look at a lot of different areas. We have to look at emotion regulation, impulse control, processing speed, mental flexibility. Social skills, perhaps, is something that we're looking at, task completion, ability to deal with distractors. And our two assessments that we have available that we're going to chat more about today include the focus assessment and the brief assessment. And both of these assessments allow us to get a good overview of not just one piece of the puzzle, but all of the different pieces of the puzzle, so that we can get a clear path, a clear direction that we need to take in order to get success. Let's first talk about the brief assessment. BRIEF is an acronym for the Behavior Rating Inventory of Executive Function. And this assessment can be done pretty much at any age. It can be done from 5 years old all the way up through adulthood. It will take you about 20 minutes. It's different for everyone because it is an online questionnaire. So it may be a little bit longer than 20 minutes or a little less. That's average. So it's an online questionnaire that can be done from your home or your office. And it is therefore subjective, right? It is influenced by your observations and your experiences on a day-to-day basis. It's designed to evaluate executive function from multiple perspectives. So this is important to keep in mind if you have, let's say, a school-age child. Let's say your daughter is 9 years old. You could complete the questionnaire, the brief parent questionnaire. And then you could also have a couple of teachers, 1 or 2 teachers perhaps, do the brief assessment. Then we're allowed to get a good perspective from multiple individuals. And it's really sometimes interesting because we may see very different results from the brief assessment that's done at home compared to the brief assessment that's done at school. Or sometimes we'll see differences within the school, right? The math teacher may have one experience with that individual, and the reading teacher has a completely different experience with that individual. And when we can get different perspectives, it allows us to make a refined plan, right? If we are seeing more difficulties in that math class, then we know that we need to focus on bringing math activities into the play attention plan. And we need to work on specific strategies so that we can help that individual with working memory, so that higher level math equations are easier. Or maybe it's just remembering mathematical computations on a day-to-day basis. So we can look at those different perspectives and refine our plan. The self-assessment is done with any age from 13 years old all the way up through adulthood. And it's important for us as adults to sometimes take maybe 20 minutes to reflect. Perhaps you're struggling and you're having a hard time keeping up at work, but why? Have you taken the time to really reflect on the different areas of executive function and look at the specific skills that right now may be weak for you? And that's why we're struggling. But perhaps with that knowledge, we can actually make a plan. It's also interesting to do with teenagers. I was talking to one mother the other day, and she had filled out a brief assessment for her 15-year-old son. And her son had done a self-assessment. And what was really interesting when I looked at the results, I was kind of surprised that the assessments were very similar, that the mom reported pretty much the same thing that the son reported. And so when I shared that with the mom, I said, are you surprised that your son is reporting that he is indeed struggling in these areas? And she said, I'm really surprised. I didn't know he cared. I didn't even know that he realized that these were areas he was struggling. And that really opened a door for a conversation that they had never had before, because she didn't know that he was actually aware of these areas and exactly what he was struggling with. But obviously, he was aware of it. And when they could have that conversation, then they were both on the same page and could make a plan of action that they were working on together. It pinpoints where and, of course, why you struggle. So that's the brief assessment. And then we're going to use that information to make a plan of action. These are the different areas that we can look at when making our plan of action. So the brief assesses inhibit, your inhibitory control. So that's your ability to stop, think, and then act. If you are an adult, maybe you notice that you interrupt people a lot while they're talking. Or if you have a child, maybe he rushes through his work just to get it done. Sometimes we think of impulsivity as those behaviors, just outright behaviors, but sometimes it can be rushing through work just to get it done and missing important details because you are rushing. Self-monitoring, that's the understanding of how your behaviors affect yourself and others around you. Shift, that's that mental flexibility, right? So if you are, let's say, hyper focused on an assignment at work, are you able to shift tasks easily? Or is it really difficult for you to move to another task and then come back to it? Emotional control. Maybe you have a child and you might notice at times that something that seems very small, a situation that seems very small to you occurs. And yet your child has a huge meltdown, a huge emotional response, just because they lack that ability to regulate their emotions. Initiate. We talked about this with the procrastination, right? The ability to start a task right away. Task completion. So not only start that task right away, but actually stay on that task until you complete it. So again, that's like 15 minutes of homework that should take 15 minutes. Or maybe you're an adult and again, you think, I've been busy all day, but I didn't get anything done. So initiating and staying on task until you complete it. Working memory. Working memory is the ability to take in information, hold that information in your mental workspace, manipulate that information, and then give a response. So it helps with reasoning, evaluating, and comprehension. Planning and organizing, of course, is a big part of executive function. Task monitoring. So as you go through your material or your assignment, are you checking yourself? Are you monitoring the task and making certain that you're not making silly errors or that you are completing all of the steps? And then, of course, organization of materials. So in the brief, we look at all of these different areas. And it's interesting because there are different questions throughout the brief, and they're not all in one little section. So it doesn't say working memory and then ask questions. They're just questions throughout, and then they're all compiled at the end in the different areas or the different processes of executive function. So these are just two examples of questions you may get in the area of working memory. So one of the questions is, or statements, I have trouble concentrating on tasks such as chores, reading, or work. And then your response is often, sometimes, or never. The other is, I have trouble with jobs or tasks that have more than one step. And this individual said sometimes. So you go through that questionnaire, everything is compiled. And then once everything is compiled, we can start looking at those results. Now, this is a very simplified report, okay? The actual brief report is very comprehensive. I have just taken one of our sample reports and I simplified it. So in one of our students, student A's skills reveal one or more areas of concern. Concerns are noted on the following scales. So student A had difficulty with inhibitory control, shift or that mental flexibility, emotional control, working memory, and planning and organizing. Now, remember, we said we don't want to just look at weaknesses. We also want to look at strengths. So otherwise, students A's abilities are appropriate in the areas of self-monitoring, initiation, task monitoring, and organization of materials. So now we can make a concrete plan. We know the strengths, and we also know the weaknesses, and we know the severity, right? Because this is norm reference. So we're getting a good view of how student A performs compared to the performance of his or her peers. Now we're going to use this information to make that customized plan. And as I mentioned earlier, we want to take the path to the right, the path that may have some accommodations that we can use, but also specific skill building. Because when we talk about accommodations or strategies, tips and strategies are really good. If I teach you how to use a checklist or I put a schedule in place, those are good tips and strategies. And they're things that we want you to have in your toolbox, things that you can use on a day-to-day basis to help you with your organization or staying on task. But then we have to get to the root cause, right? It's not enough to give you a checklist. I have to look and see that I need to improve your ability to focus. I need to improve your memory, both your short-term memory and your working memory, so that if I give you a checklist, you remember that you have that checklist. You remember to keep up with that checklist. So we want accommodations, and we also want specific skill building so that we can get to the root cause. This is an example of a working memory plan of action. So first we look at, student A. And for one of the accommodations, we know that working memory is a difficult area. So the presentation of new material needs to be broken down, right? So student A may need additional processing time or time to rehearse new information, because we know it takes student A a little bit longer in order to hold that information in mental workspace and assimilate that new knowledge with prior knowledge. So we need to give student A a little bit more time to process and rehearse and practice new information. So that's one of the accommodations we could make. But then within play attention, if you look at our module here that I put a star next to, I put a star next to working memory, because we have working memory module in our masterclass. And that means we are going to specifically teach and improve the skill of working memory. We're going to give student A an opportunity to practice working memory. So we're giving accommodations, but then we're also doing skill building to get to the root cause so that there will be success. And remember, within play attention, when student A is doing working memory, the student will be wearing the body wave armband. And remember, on the back, there are 3 sensors, and those sensors monitor that student's ability to pay attention. So the student can only activate or work on working memory if he is actively engaged, if he is paying attention to the process. If he's not paying attention, then the activity will stop, and we're going to wait for him to focus back in order for him to continue working on working memory. So it's a very comprehensive plan where we're addressing working memory. And that's just one area we'd actually work on. But I wanted to give you an example of a combined approach that we can get out of that assessment. Now, let's look at the focus assessment. So we had the brief assessment that was subjective, right? It's based on our observations, our opinions, our experience on a day-to-day basis. Now we're going to look at the focus assessment, which is considered to be a CPT, a continuous performance test. And it is norm reference test of attentional control. So this is based on data. It is not influenced on opinion or experience. Again, it's appropriate for ages 5 through adult. It does take 20 minutes. It measures your ability to pay attention to what's important and ignore unnecessary stimuli. So I should mention here that it is a very mundane task. It's going to seem like a very long 20 minutes, but we want to see how you perform on a low stimuli type of task, because we know typically an individual with ADHD can typically hyperfocus if it's high interest or high stimuli, right? If I give your child a video game, he can probably hyperfocus where it's hard to draw him away from it. So we want to make certain that we give you not entertainment or high interest that we know you can pay attention to, but what's more difficult. And that's a low stimuli type of activity, much like homework or office work. So it goes on for about 20 minutes, and we assess 4 different areas, 4 different constructs of attentional control. These include consistency. So consistency, we're looking at the quality of your responses. And if you're lower than the norm in the area of consistency, that typically means that you have a hard time starting and completing assignments in a timely manner. Or perhaps you have a child and one day she knows her math facts beautifully. And then the next day, it looks like she's never seen those math facts before in her life. So there's inconsistency in her responses and her knowledge. We also look at performance. We're looking at the accuracy and the speed of your responses. So if you're lower than the norm in the area of performance, that typically means that you have a slower processing speed. So you know the information, you understand the information. It just takes you a little bit longer to process all of the information and give a response. Or perhaps you have a child, and when you say, go to your room, put away your sneakers, bring down your jacket, he'll get up to the room and will have to be redirected or reminded. So your child has a hard time following through with multiple step verbal instructions. And it was, again, interesting. I was talking to a mom the other day, and we were looking at her daughter's results from the focus assessment. And she was 12 years old, and she scored very low in the area of performance. And so when I said to the mother, this is like, if your daughter, she's scoring lower than the norm, I would expect if you give her multiple step instructions, verbal instructions, she has a hard time following through. And the mom said, yeah, you're right, all the time. I thought she was just being defiant, so I just keep yelling at her. And that doesn't work, right? That's not skill building. But I understand the frustration because you think, well, why can you not just follow through? Why can't you just listen to what I'm saying and do what I'm asking you to do? And we see that a lot in school too, where the teacher might say, oh, he's just so defiant. He'll never do what I ask him to do. But when we do an assessment and we can see, this is a skill that's really genuinely difficult for this individual, then instead of just yelling, instead of just assuming that the child is defiant, we can make a plan of action to help that student be successful. Because I guarantee you, your child does want to follow through with what you said. A lot of times they think they did follow through, but it's a difficult skill area. It's much like you can compare it to a reading disability, right? If your child is assessed and found to have a reading disability, then you're not going to sit your child down and hand your child the novel and say, now read this and give me a summary, right? You're going to put programs in place, a plan of action to help your child develop the ability to read so that you can then, at some point, when you reach that final destination, give your child a novel and have your child read that novel. It's the same here. If he's having a hard time with processing speed and following through with multiple step instructions, then we can make a plan to help develop that skill. Impulse control, that again, the ability to stop, think, and then act, or, not rush through work just to get it done. And then we also look at distractions, both auditory and visual. And I really like this broken down. I was talking to a couple of parents earlier today, and I said, you see that your child is much more distracted visually than auditorily. And the mom laughed and she said, that's so funny because he said every time that cat, because there's a visual of a cat on the screen as a distraction in some parts of the focus assessment, whenever that cat popped up, he said he kept following the cat and forgot about his task and he kept making errors at that point. So it really does allow us to see, are they more distracted visually or auditorily, or is it about the same? Once we know, again, we can make a plan of action. Now, I wanted to share with you a student of ours, and this is the pre-assessment. You see that it was given in January 2016. She was 6 years old. And the blue line is her individual line, okay? With the purple line being the norm. And the light purple is below the norm, the lower part of the norm where we need to make improvements. And you see that she's lower in that lower part of the norm, right around 24%. So our goal is going to be to move her to this 51%. And we want to move her to 51% or higher because as she gets older, that norm group actually moves to the right. So we see right now, this is an area of concern. She has a hard time with the quality of her responses, the ability to start assignments right away, keep her attention just on that assignment until completion. That is one of the areas of concern. So then we can make a plan of action. So one of the accommodations would be to give her short breaks because she's having a hard time starting and completing. So perhaps we break those assignments down and give her mini breaks. That's the accommodation. But within play attention itself, we're going to do skill building, right? So that eventually we don't have to provide those breaks because she has the skills to sustain her attention, start that task, stay on that task until completion. And in order to develop those skills, we're going to incorporate the modules of attention stamina, time on task, and academic bridge. Those three modules within play attention specifically address the skills she needs to develop so that she can be more consistent, so that we'll see that line go up on that consistency, so that when I give her a 15-minute assignment, she is going to be able to complete it in 15 minutes and not 2 or 3 hours. Okay. So we have that combined approach based on her results. So that's a sample plan of action. Now, we only looked at consistency and working memory, but you see that we can take all of that information and customize a plan for her. And then, of course, we want to circle back and see if she reached her final destination. So after we put this plan in place, let's look at her post-evaluation. So if we look in January 2016, she was at 24%, right? And we wanted to push her above that 51%. When we did the post-evaluation to make certain we reached our final destination, we reached our goal, which was to help her improve consistency, which means in the day-to-day, she can complete an assignment in a timely manner. Then in June of 2017, we did the post-evaluation and she was at 88%, well above the norm, which is so exciting to see. Not just for us, but also for her teachers and her parents and for Cara herself, because now she's able to actually show what she knows and she's able to complete assignments. I also wanted to share her impulse control with you. Impulsivity on the focus assessment is considered a negative construct. So actually, the lower the number, the better. Consistency is a positive construct, right? It positively reinforces executive function. Impulsivity is a negative construct. She was at 88% impulsive, which means 88% of that 20-minute block of time. Remember, the assessment's 20 minutes long. 88% of that time, she was impulsively responding. So we want to get that down to 14% or lower. And when we did the post-evaluation, she was at 1%. She had developed the ability through that path we gave her, that plan of action that we provided for her. She was able to develop the ability to stop, think, and then act. Okay. Now, Maria has a question along the lines of impulsivity, which we're on right now. Does impulse control also have to do with regulating what you say? I tend to speak negatively of myself without thinking of consequences, or have my teammates will take my outbursts. I also have a terrible time not interrupting people, which I struggle with most of my career. Yes, absolutely. That tending just to blurt out the first thing that comes to your mind and not thinking about the consequences, or as you say, interrupting people, that is, Maria, directly related to impulse control. And we address impulsivity in every single Play Attention module. So there's a beginner, intermediate, and advanced skill option. And in each of those areas, there are certain benchmarks you have to reach before moving up to intermediate and then to advanced. And our artificial intelligence will track that and graduate you when appropriate. And when we get into the intermediate and advanced skill option, we tie in other processes that are important for executive function or required for executive function. And those include distractions, mental flexibility, and processing speed, and impulse control. So every single session and every single module that you work on within Play Attention, you're addressing your impulsivity, your ability to control your impulsive nature. And Bill says that he also has the same issues, Maria. So you are not alone. This is a very common area for both children and adults. So I hope that really summarizes and gives you a new perspective of assessments, why they're important, and what we can use that information for. The assessments help us describe the problem areas, again, shows us your strengths and your weaknesses. And Maria, that might be important for you because it sounds like you're very hard on yourself. So maybe you need an assessment so that we can look at some of those strong areas and highlight some of those strengths, so that your first course of action is not to go to the negative, but to actually come out with some of those positive responses about yourself. Indicates the severity of those weaknesses because we want to know, is it really an issue or is it my son just 7 being 7, right? Um, and then it also allows us to develop a plan of action and provides a baseline to document progress, to make certain that we reach our goals, we reach that final destination, and not only reach those goals, but allows us to customize the plan along the way. Brenda says, do some people take the test and not follow through with your program? Absolutely. We can always start with the assessments and talk about a plan. If you feel like you'd like to just start with some accommodations and that knowledge base in the beginning, great. And then once you're ready to get to the root issue, then you can look at a customized plan. But we are here to do those assessments with you, Brenda, and to share some of that information with you so that we can look at all of your different strengths and weaknesses. And then we can talk about a customized plan that would be available to address all of those different areas. So if you are interested in doing one of the assessments, perhaps the focus or the brief, or maybe you would like to do both of them, you could type in assessment in the chat box, and we'll follow up with you to talk about those next steps and getting you registered for the assessment. Because of course, if you are going to do an assessment, either with yourself or with a child or a student or client, we would need that person's date of birth, because remember, it is norm referenced. Now, typically the assessments are $50 a piece. And with today's webinar special, though, we are giving every webinar attendee each assessment at half price. So the brief assessment and the focus assessment, each assessment would be $25, but then we'll need about a 40 minute, probably closer to 40-minute block of time to review the results and talk about those results with you, and then talk about a plan of action, right? These are the strengths, these are the weaknesses, and what's our plan? Because it's not enough to just have an assessment and not have a plan. You know, I talk to so many parents who say, we went through a neuropsych evaluation and now I have a 24-page report on all of the areas of concern, but I have no plan. So let's look at the different areas of concern, but also look at a plan of action. What can you do next to actually improve those areas? So again, if you're interested in doing an assessment, just type in assessment and we will contact you to chat about the assessments more. Perhaps you have more questions, or we can help you get registered for the assessments and the follow-up as well. Brenda says, at 69 years old, I'm thinking change would be quite difficult. You know, Brenda, you bring up an important point, but I can tell you that I would say our largest growing population for play attention are those individuals between the areas of 50 and 75. It is never too late. We know that through neuroplasticity, that the brain is moldable, it's shapeable. And if we provide you with the right tools and the right challenge, you can develop these skills. You have a lot of time left, and you want to make certain that you enjoy, right? Enjoy your life, be able to develop some of these skills that would allow you to not work so hard. So I understand that you think at this point, change might be hard, but it's not impossible. It does take time, it does take effort, but it's truly accessible to you. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. But I would like to share some of our stories with you, Brenda, and I'm going to send you some of those as well from clients who are about your age. Okay. So when we talk about, Maria says, totally understand. I was diagnosed at 54 and realized many of the issues have been a lifelong struggle. Maria, I talk to so many people that go through the same way, same thing, in that they're just finding out now as adults that, oh, this is what I've struggled with. Or we have parents who will call in, they say, I never knew what I was struggling with until my child was diagnosed. And then it all made sense. And it's kind of a relief, right? Once you know the areas that you need to improve and you can have a plan, it really is kind of freeing for you also. And so I look forward to contacting all of you. It'll be myself or some of my colleagues that will contact you and make certain that you get registered for the assessment. Also, we can go through play attention and how play attention can help you develop all of these core cognitive skills that are required for executive function. And we address many areas in the course of executive function. We address attention stamina, visual tracking, task completion, short-term memory, filtering distractions. We address transfer and generalization. Like I said, in the beginner, intermediate, and advanced skill options, in the higher levels, we tie in processing speed, task switching, impulse control, and distractors. Then we have a series of modules in our masterclass, and those include working memory, auditory processing, hand-eye coordination, social skills, motor skills, spatial memory, and mindfulness. So we're not only going to provide an assessment and look at the strengths and weaknesses. We'll talk about some accommodations that we would recommend, but then we'll get to the root cause and we'll actually develop a comprehensive plan to help you develop all of these foundational skills that are required for strong executive function. So here are some next steps, and please keep your questions and comments coming. I will come back to them. I know that some people do have to go. So, great, Bill. We will get you registered as well. Now we have a lot of next steps that we can do. Of course, you can register for an assessment. So type in assessment if you are interested in the assessment. And again, you will be able to do each assessment at half price, but we will need about a 40-minute block of time to review the results. If you've already done an assessment and you're not interested in doing another assessment, or you just really aren't interested in the assessment part, but you want more information about a plan of action or how play attention could develop a customized plan for you, you can schedule a one-on-one consultation without doing the assessment. And we will listen to the different areas of concern and talk about how we can customize a plan for you. So you can do the assessment. Obviously, the assessment comes with the consultation, or you can just do the consultation. So if you just want a consultation, you can type in consultation. Yes, it's $25 for each assessment. Okay. Now, also, you may want to, maybe you don't want a one-on-one consultation, but you do want more information on play attention. Just type in webinar. Our next play attention webinar is July 7th at this same time, 1 o'clock Eastern time. And we're going to go through all the information about play attention, from the foundational skills that we address. We'll talk more about the technology. I just touched on our NASA-inspired body wave technology. We'll go more into the technology itself. We'll talk about our behavior shaping component. We'll talk about Tufts University School of Medicine research that was done with play attention. So we'll talk about everything play attention at our next webinar. That's July 7th. So if you want to do the webinar, just type in webinar. And I also want to invite you to join our 30-day summer mindfulness challenge. Now, this challenge does start on July 1st. And every day in the month of July, you're going to have access to about a 15-minute mindfulness practice. And you can just type in mindfulness if you're interested in our mindfulness challenge, or challenge, either one. We'll know what you mean. And it's a free mindfulness challenge. And like I said, every day we're trying to keep them short, maybe 10, 15-minute mindfulness practice for you to do in the morning or in the evening. You can do the practices yourself or with a friend or as a family. So if you would like to register for that, just type in mindfulness or challenge and we'll get you registered for that. Take care, everyone. And thank you so much for your time and your attention.